Hey, this is Charles Thompson. He is a former OU quarterback at Central State, won a national championship. And this is something I really want. God, you've done a lot, man. So Charles, the first question I ask everybody is hardest person or team you've ever had to play against.
Well, for me, it's probably going to be the University of Miami. We played them when I was at the University of Oklahoma in the 1987 Orange Bowl. And of course, they had Jimmy Johnson as their head coach, Michael Irvin, Benny Blades, all that very talented group.
Mm.
And we were ranked number one all year, and then ultimately ended up losing to them in that 20-14 battle there in the Orange Bowl. We played in their home stadium, so that was probably the toughest football game that I played in.
Mm. So I know you grew up in Lawton. So tell me about how it was growing up in Lawton and just being there, and, in your high school experience, and then going to OU. So how was all that?
Well, for me, growing up in Lawton, listen, I mean, it was, we had one youth football league in Lawton, and so it was a big thing to always go. There was two things that was big in Lawton when I was growing up being a young football athlete. There was the preseason jamboree, which you had every elementary school in the Lawton that brought a team to this jamboree, kind of like a one-day event. And you start out early in the morning and you'd play all the way up into who was the last man standing. And I always wanted to win that jamboree. I thought that'd be the coolest deal. I made it to the semifinals once in my whole entire life, but it was a big deal there. And then, of course, we also had the end of the year city championships. And once again, I never was able to win it. I always made it to the semifinals, the very deepest I ever went in either one of those, and never was able to bring home the trophy. I was always kind of on a team that was somewhat of a one show pony. That was me, and I could do a pretty decent against a lot of teams that didn't have that. But when you run up into the last 4 or 5 teams remaining, they've got a lot of depth, and they had some kids that was just as talented as I was. I remember the Fisher brothers, who one of them actually ended up going to school with me at the University of Oklahoma, was a very talented young kid as well there. And so, but those are the things that I remember growing up, competing in Lawton, playing football. I was a baseball player too.
Yeah.
So baseball was my second love, and just going around playing baseball. For me, everybody in baseball enjoyed hitting home runs. For me, it was just stealing bases. Like, I was a guy that I'll get on if it don't matter how I get on. And I developed to be a power hitter as I got older in high school. But early on in my career, I was a very small individual. I think I graduated high school 155 pounds. So I was always small my entire life. But just the love of baseball for me was about stealing bases, watching the Vince Colemans, the Willie McGee's, the Tim Raines, and all those guys. Those Ricky Henderson, those was the guys that I mirrored my game after. And I just wanted to be a guy that stole bases. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. And so tell me, I know you got drafted by the Reds. You got drafted out of high school, right?
Correct.
So how was that experience, and what made you go to the football route to play for OU and Barry Switzer instead of just going pro for baseball?
Well, I mean, obviously I was here's what happened to me. So early on in my scouting recruitment for baseball, all the schools, all the teams wanted me to say that if I got drafted earlier, that I wouldn't go to University of Oklahoma. Well, it's one thing that I was always honest with people. My dad taught me to be honest, and I just told him it'd always been a dream of mine to go play at the University of Oklahoma for Barry Switzer. So it didn't really matter where they drafted me. My mind was set on going to University of Oklahoma and potentially playing both sports. And so when I got drafted out of high school, that pushed me back in a little bit later round because I wouldn't make that commitment to any of the teams. And so ultimately my goal was to go to Oklahoma. The early on part of my career there was to play both football and baseball and continue to have that opportunity to pursue both sports. Some things happened early on in my career there at University of Oklahoma, my first spring there. Jamel and they moved I was 4th string going into spring. They moved one of the quarterbacks to running back, Eric Mitchell. They moved Glenn Sullivan, went and played baseball full time. So I went from 4th string to 2nd string in my first spring there. Mm. And then they were going to still allow me to play baseball. And as I was going out for the first week of baseball practice, Jamel Holloway tears his thumb up in spring. So that leaves me the only quarterback.
Oh, wow.
Coach Switzer then brings me back to the football and says, I got to have you back now. And that's somewhat ended my baseball career there, my first year in college at University of Oklahoma.
Wow, that's crazy. Stay ready, so you ain't got to get ready.
That's right.
Yeah, that's crazy. So being at OU, you obviously have the Bedlam series, Red River. You played in the game of the century against Nebraska. How was all that? And so can you talk about those 3 individuals and just talk about that OSU rivalry, OU Texas rivalry, and after playing the game of the century against Nebraska? Talk a little bit about all that.
It's funny, Kevin. All those games took on different meanings for us as a team.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, the Texas game, we weren't in the same conference. They was in the Southwest Conference. It was really more for bragging rights back then because Oklahoma heavily recruited Texas. Switzer always said, you got to go make your mark in Texas. So it was important from a recruiting standpoint to beat the Longhorns on that first Saturday in October. So that's what that was more about, the bragging rights of owning the Red River, being the top dog. And it's funny, now being on the side of the Texas that my son is there, we call it OU Texas weekend. They call it Texas OU. I didn't really realize that significance of that, but it's funny that that's the case. But for us, that's what that was about. It was more bragging rights. For Oklahoma State, it was really more about we looked upon them like the little brother. And it was, they hadn't lost to Oklahoma State. God, I think when I got there, they hadn't lost in years. I think it was 1978 was the last time they lost. And I got there in 86, 87. So I didn't want to be known. It was always this notion, don't be known as the first or not, the one of the only quarterbacks to lose Oklahoma State. So it was more of a pride thing. You couldn't let your little brother beat you. And that's what Oklahoma State was. Nebraska was all about mutual respect. Listen, I grew up in Lawton, Oklahoma, and every Thanksgiving since I was 6 years old, I sat in front of the TV and watched OU and Nebraska play. And most of the time, it was for the rights to go out and play in the Orange Bowl and sometimes for the national championship. So I grew up seeing the oranges thrown on the field at the end of the game, whichever team won. So for me, that game always signified who was going to be the top dog in the conference, the Big 8 conference back then. And you knew you always had to go through Nebraska. Barry Switzer had done a pretty decent job against Nebraska, but there was a lot of mutual respect with the players and the caliber of teams that they put on the field. So we knew we had to bring our A game playing against them. So the game of the century for me, it's probably the one game that I remember the most in my whole entire career at the University of Oklahoma, because it was a game that no one expected us to win. Even prior to the season started, we were ranked number 1, they were ranked number 2 all year. Jamel Holloway was projected to be the starting quarterback, and they even doubted, a lot of writers across the country doubted that even Jamel could lead the Sooners into Lincoln and upset them. Well, when Jamel goes out, of course, here I am as that individual. They certainly didn't give us any credence. In fact, my first start was the Missouri game right before the Nebraska game at home, and we were favored probably by 50 points. I can't even remember.
Yeah.
But we barely won, 17-14. I had a really poor outing. I was kind of not in sync with the rest of my backfield, kind of trying to rush things. Just wasn't – I had this kinetic energy that just was off-kilter a little bit. And so we barely squeaked out at home a win. And so the writers in the polls, because of that, they doubted with Jamel. And here I was in my first start. They saw that performance. We still won the game. They dropped us to number 2 and moved Nebraska to number 1. So it was an extra amount of motivation all week for me. I remember Coach Switzer walking up in the huddle. It was about Thursday night. And he came to me, and I was laser focused because I knew there was a lot of pressure. Listen, I grew up in Lawton, like I said, and for me to be a part of this game, and it's everything that I imagined. You win this game, you get a chance to go to the Orange Bowl and play for the national championship. For me, from 6 years old, Kevin, I dreamed of these moments. And so to be a part of that, I just took it as a personal challenge. And I'll never forget on that Thursday, Switzer walks in the huddle and he looks at me and he says, Charlie Thompson, if you play like you practice this week, you're going to shock the nation this Saturday. And that's what my focus was. The team believed in me. They knew I had the ability to do it. One thing that Coach Switzer had done for me early on in the season, as a backup, I played in just about every game anyway. So I got a tremendous amount of snaps as a backup quarterback. And so I had almost 1,000 yards rushing as a backup. So he got me plenty of reps, knowing as an option quarterback, you may need 2. And so, man, that was, for me, it was probably the biggest game going into Lincoln, Nebraska on that cold November day, and just shocking the nation and getting Oklahoma the opportunity to go play Miami for the national champ is probably the number 1 game I remember in my tenure in my career at the University of Oklahoma.
So what were some of like the biggest transitions from you going from Lawton to at OU? What were some of the just where you're like, man, I got to really get better doing this?
Well, number 1, it was in the weight room. As I mentioned, I came in out of Oklahoma. I came out of Lawton, Oklahoma at 155 pounds, which obviously is very small. Now, I didn't. Even the year that I played for the national championship, I was only 165 pounds at that time. But, you got to be blazing fast. I ran a 4.3 flat 40, and that kind of saved me a little bit. But I got beat up quite a bit, and I knew that the biggest transition was that you got to bulk up a little bit more. you got to get focused in the weight room in the offseason and put a little bit more weight on. And so that was more the transition. The game itself, what I saw with going from obviously high school to college, everybody's good.
Right.
Everybody's fast. You got D linemen who can run 4.5s and 4.6s. And so it wasn't like you could get down there in Lawton, I could razzle dazzle, turn around and run here or there. In college, man, you had to know exactly what you do. You had to trust your teammates, and you had to believe that everyone else on the field could help you do your job. And so you had to rely on and trust them. And that's what I had. Probably the biggest adjustment for me. I remember Coach Jim Donna, who was my offensive coordinator at the time. I remember him telling me in one of the early games, he says, Charles, this is not Lawton, Oklahoma. You got people can help you here. You know, just trust them. And if you got to make a pitch, make a pitch. You don't have to do it all by yourself. So that was probably the biggest adjustment for me.
Mm-hmm. So after, the break you had from football, how did you keep your motivation to continue your career and then go to Central State and all the way in Ohio?
Well, it's just when you listen, I'm a fighter, and I believe I'm a winner, and I believe that things don't always come easy. And just because you face adversity doesn't mean you have to fold up. I used to always like the fact that Coach Switzer would say what he loved about some of the quarterbacks that he had in the minority quarterbacks was that they were used to a tougher environment growing up. Yeah. And so it wasn't difficult for them when the going got tough. They got tougher because that's what they was used to.
Right.
And so I adopted that same philosophy when I went through my troubles and my time. I knew what I was destined to be. I knew the talent that God had given me, and I didn't give up on myself. And so despite all the naysayers, despite all the negative writing nationally, despite being on the cover of Sports Illustrated in a negative way, I knew that I had the ability, and I knew that God had given me the drive within myself to overcome just about anything. And so I stayed focused on that. I kept believing in myself, even when there was times it was difficult to do that. And I knew that at some point I'd still have an opportunity to right the wrong. And I think I've done a pretty good job of that.
Right. So how was it spending your time at a HBCU and just being in Ohio? Because how did they come about? How did that come about? Like, just talk about just your experience in Ohio and win a national championship. So that's something everybody wants.
Well, listen, I tell you, it was weird because I'm from my mom grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and right outside of Fort Smith, Arkansas, is a little place called Roland, Oklahoma. There was a coach there at the time who was at Central State in Ohio. He was from Roland, so he knew kind of my family. He was also a coach at Central State in Oklahoma, which was I think they called it Central State Broncos back then. It might be
UCO now.
UCO now. Yeah. Well, he was there, so he had known me and followed me through my career at the University of Oklahoma. And so when all this stuff happened, I was being recruited and talked to by a lot of different schools to go play quarterback. Troy State, different schools. I got a letter from Bill McCartney, who was a coach at Colorado, wishing me the best of luck, and there was some thought notion, perhaps maybe looking at that, and I didn't. But I knew that the only way that I had an opportunity to go and extend my career was not going to be at the quarterback position. I had to find a place that would give me an opportunity to showcase my other skills at a running back or a receiver or catching the ball. So when Central State, Coach Jones, who was there at Central State in Oklahoma, took the job out in Central State in Ohio, he picked up the phone and called me and basically asked me would I be interested in Central. I knew nothing about it. And I said, man, I don't know. I've never been to Ohio. Don't know anything about it. The only thing I know about Ohio is it's cold. So they got me to come down there to what they call the Mayfest weekend down in Central. And, man, I just had such a blast time down there. And I looked at their program. And what I realized was, although they're NAIA school, number one, they had a lot of talent that was flowing through there.
Yeah.
And number two, they were one of the top NAIA schools in the country. And so they became instantly attracted to me. When they told me they didn't want me to play quarterback. They already had a quarterback who was potentially going to be drafted, named Henderson Mosley, and God rest his soul. That was one of the deciding factors that they told me I could come there and play running back. And that's really what led me to go to Central State in Ohio. And listen, it was a different experience coming from the University of Oklahoma to a HBCU there. It was a very enlightening experience. I love my experience there. It was as much fun I had at Oklahoma in a different way. I had more of a down home and personal fun and great time at Central. It was just unbelievable. And we were very successful. Some of the friends that I still have now are guys that we say Marauders for life. There's some of my great friends, Antoine Boyd and Winston Delaney, or my two ace boom coons. And I just love my time there. Winning the national championship there. Listen, we probably would have won it 2 years in a row. So the first year I get there, something happened with my transcript, and I was ruled ineligible. I was 3 hours short because they misread some class of my transcript. Oh, wow. And so it was too late for me to correct it. If I had known, I could have corrected it over the summer. And so I ended up being 3 hours short. And so I wasn't able to play my first year I ended up watching. They made it to the semifinals that year. And a lot of the teammates on the team think that I could have made a difference that year if I had been eligible to play. We then ended up coming back the next year. Henderson Mosley and I both Henderson Mosley didn't play the first year I was there. He got ruled ineligible as well. So I had a buddy of mine, Winston Delaney, was a quarterback, the gunslinger they call him. We both returned back the next year, and of course went on that undefeated run and won the national championship.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, because a lot of people sleep on the NAI, man. Just so you know, it's a smaller school because I go to NAI school, and the dudes is nice, man. That play, like there is some real talent.
Well, we had some guys like Eric Williams, who ended up being the offensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys in their Super Bowl run. He was from Central. Hugh Douglas, who was with the Philadelphia Eagles, started defensive end. He played with me at Central. You had guys like Roosevelt Buck, who was with the New Orleans Saints. You had Marvin Coleman, who was an unbelievable punt returner. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. We had a lot of great talent there. A lot of guys either went on to play professionally in the NFL or in the Canadian Football League. So it's a tremendous amount of talent that was walking around on those campuses there at Central State. And I was tell you, some of the best athletes that I ended up being around, obviously, were at Central State.
Well, that's great. So I know you wrote a book, about the OU lifestyle. And can you talk about that and what the process was of you writing the book?
Well, the real reason why I wrote the book, it was not necessarily to slander the University of Oklahoma. In fact, I was approached by the NCAA to basically try to get Oklahoma on some more penalties with some NCAA violations, and I neglected and declined 100%. So my book was never about trying to expose or get Oklahoma. It was more about when I was waking up during my time and I was going through all my downtime, I'd wake up and turn on the TV, or I'd read a paper or read a book or article, and I read many people trying to tell me who I was and why I did what I did, or trying to explain to me, as you know, media people do a lot. I'm a media myself, trying to give an explanation on what happened and why this happened and why this. And I thought, who's better to tell the story myself?
Than you, yeah.
And so I was approached about writing the book. And so I was thinking of, how can I pay it forward? How can I give a real vivid picture to all the people up and coming on what life is really about as a big-time star athlete on prime-time, big-time football teams at a school like University of Oklahoma. So I wrote my book more to as a blueprint. Here's the pitfalls you want to stay away from. Sure, did I make some money off of it? Absolutely, I did. But it was more because of that I felt moved to write the book.
So I know you're a motivational speaker as well as many other things. So how did the motivational speaking come about, and how is that impacting kids every day and seeing, oh my God, Charles Thompson's come to the school? Or, you know what I mean? Like how is all that?
Well, here's how it really came about. Years ago, after I got out, John Odell, who was the president of the state of Oklahoma's FCA, he called me up. He's a good friend of mine, and said, "Hey, man, I think your story would be great for some of these young student athletes to hear." And I said, "Well, I get it, John." At that time, I was kind of backing away a little bit from the limelight in Oklahoma, and so I really didn't want to throw myself there. He said, "Man, I really think it'd be good." So I started doing some small groups for John Odell at FCA. He made a recommendation after hearing me a couple of times. He said, "Charles, I really think you could. A lot of people need to hear this at university and everything." So he got me in contact with the Alamo Bowl in San Antonio, and the Alamo Bowl flew me in, and I can't remember who the actual teams were at the time. I'm sorry, not the Alamo Bowl. It was the Sun Bowl. I went to the Sun Bowl in El Paso, and that was kind of the first of my launch of being what's called a national public speaker. And so I began to get a lot of requests after that, going around telling my story, and it's been escalated from there to many different levels, from many different variety of different groups throughout the years. And so I look at it as paying it forward, to be honest with you. It's not a story that I'm necessarily proud of, but it is my story. And the only thing that I can say to that is, it's not about how you start it, it's how you finish it. And so felt like I was able to overcome the adversities. It led me to get involved in youth sports here in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And so my passion and my legacy and my drive today is the many kids that I know that are now playing college and have gone on to play pro ball, that because of a program I started 20 years ago in Oklahoma City, I've got a 5 football field, 22-acre football complex, that guys like my own son, Kendall and Casey Thompson, guys like Charlie Kolar, who's the Iowa State tight end, guys like Timmy Flanders, who's playing in the CFL, guys like Sam Bradford, who competed through our leagues, guys like Gerald McCoy, who have been involved in our youth programs, Dominique Franks, all these guys that have come through and have gone on and we've put, from our organization, we've probably put as many as 5 or 6 dozen of players from a collegiate level all the way up to some have made it on to professional level. So that's been my drive, and that's what I continue to do today. I still have that same complex. I'm still making an impact and trying to make a difference in some of these young kids' lives around here in this Oklahoma City community.
So I know you have 3 sons, Kendall, Casey, and Cade. What is it like watching them, or how does it like watching them grow up? And, Kendall's obviously playing at a high level. He is. Casey is great, and I don't know Cade, but I'm sure he's probably athletic, So how's all that watching them grow up and being in that process?
Well, listen, it was, I enjoyed so much playing myself. But one of the greatest joys that I've had, and any dad will probably tell you the same thing, is watching your kids excel. My oldest son, Kendall, he went to follow my footsteps. He got a scholarship for the University of Oklahoma. It was a quarterback there, ended up transferring to Utah. Also spent some time in Canadian football, in the NFL with the Washington Redskins and the Los Angeles Rams. They move all over, I'm sorry. But just to watch him excel in that and to get a chance to see him excel in a preseason game and make some big catches was unbelievable as a wide receiver. Now getting to watch my son, Casey, who has been this past year was called upon at University of Texas, came in the Alamo Bowl and just had an unbelievable performance. So those are great joys for me as a dad because I've put in the sweat equity. I've invested my time, energy, and knowledge into my kids because they've chosen to be in the business of football. And so in the business of football, there's only one way to do it, and that's the right way. So I've pushed them to the max of their ability. I've driven them. I've wanted them to excel. And they understand and know that to get things in life, especially in football, it's not solely on talent. It's about work ethic, consistency, dedication, and just being at the right place at the right time. When all those things fall into place, you have to be ready for it. And that was kind of why I was so excited for Casey last year when he was ready and that opportunity came in the Alamo Bowl, he was ready. My youngest son, Cade, is a very athletic individual. He's the only one that's not a quarterback. He's a slot receiver, wide receiver, H-back type individual. He's got unbelievable hands. He currently right now isn't playing football. He's more of the actor, comedian type. And, as they say, each kid has their own mark they have to leave behind. And I'm just very proud of all my kids. I've got just a great group of boys who, do things the right way.
Mm-hmm. So what is in store for you in the future plans?
Well, obviously for me, it's to continue to do what I've been doing. I'm here in this Oklahoma City community trying to make a difference, being on the ground foots of the inner city. And so that's what my impact's called for. I want to try to make a difference in these young kids' lives. I want to try to get these kids as early and as easily, as quickly as possible as we can, get them to be fully qualified scholastic athletes where they can have the ability, not only from just a talent standpoint, from an academic standpoint, to be in a position to be able to pursue their dreams of playing college football.
Mm-hmm. So here's the bonus questions I have. So we're wrapping up. This is the bonus questions. So the first question is Mount Rushmore of athletes.
My Mount Rushmore of athletes, all sports?
Yep, all sports.
Well, obviously for me, it's, I grew up in the Muhammad Ali era. So certainly Muhammad Ali would be one for me, just, one of the greatest of what he did during his time. I'm a huge Michael Jordan fan, so he would have to be up there as well. And then for me, what he did in golf, Tiger Woods, those would be my 3 just Mount Rushmores in terms of that. And when I look at football, God, there's just so many people.
Yeah.
I'm such a huge Barry Sanders fan as a running back. So I would probably say for the style of way he played, I would probably look at Barry Sanders, or even, I'll be honest with you, I was a big Deion Sanders fan. So one of those guys would be, it's ironic, people probably think I'd say quarterback. But I just, for what Deion did to the game as a cornerback, to me was unlike anything that anyone else had ever done. The way Barry Sanders played it as a running back, I got a chance to play against him personally. Still know him today, just a very humble guy. So those guys would be, but really, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, and Muhammad Ali would be certainly my top three.
Mm-hmm. Favorite sports memory that you have in any game you played in? What was favorite sports memory?
Well, I think obviously to me when I got in the game against the Longhorns, going 65 yards in the Cotton Bowl was a great memory that I had. I told you beating Nebraska. Yeah. There in that the game of the century was great. And then there's a run that no one really knows and talks about. I would have set the record for one of the longest runs in Oklahoma history. I'd had a 98-yard touchdown called back because of a holding, but that was a run that one of my greatest memories as well at that. And then of course, winning the national champion at Central State, having the feeling of saying at the end of the year, that you're the best, you're the top of the mountain. It was a great feeling.
So my last one, a personal one, is who would you want to see on the interview but the only thing is you have to help me get them on here. Who's one person you want to see on
here? Interview. Man, I'm really, I tell you that's a very good question. Probably for you, I would say Marcus Dupree. Yeah, he would be a good one for you.
Yeah, you got to help me get him, man. That would be awesome.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. I think he'd be a good one for you.
Yeah, hit him up.
I would say you would be. I would tell you that you would be. I don't know if we could get him, but I know who you'd have the greatest interview with if he would do it. I don't know that he would. He's so. Man, if you ever got a chance to interview Coach Switzer, you'd be unreal.
Yeah. I was like, I thought when I first started, I was like, Coach Switzer, OU legend, Bob Stoops, somebody like that would be so awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and listen, I know Switzer he's got so many stories that he would just be if he took listen, every time I've had him on my own radio show, he just takes over. He's an unbelievable storyteller. He's got an infectious way of his words reaching out to you. So he would be another good one. I just don't know how possible that would be. But I would say Marcus, and then that high end Mount Rushmore list, it would be Coach Switzer.
Yeah, try to get him for me. Try to get anybody you can. Try to get anybody you can.
Absolutely.
I can. But hey, I want to thank you so much for doing this. This was awesome. I was mesmerized. I was literally just sitting there listening. I was just, so it was awesome, man. Keep striving. I'm obviously in the city. We can meet up sometime, you know what I mean? And just connect that way.
Yeah. So, sounds good. I appreciate it. Sorry it took so long to get connected, but I'm glad we finally did.
Yeah, I'm happy we did too. So I appreciate you.
All right. Have a good one, Kev.